Righty. Thank you everybody for joining us, joining TBC on this webinar. My name is Dieter Gabel. I'm the CEO of TB Consulting. I am truly excited. We've got a great team today. Let me just quickly introduce them, and then you'll see them more in their speaking roles as we get through this. Got a couple of veterans literally here. Jim Nedved comes out of the Air Force, internationally recognized technology leader. He's out of the, like a few of us, out of the Big Six consulting area, and has an extensive track record of successful project and program delivery on a global scale. So he'll have some really good information to share with us. Eric Marshall, dedicated solution architect that is helping many of our clients achieve their IT transformation dreams. And then Tyler Edgett, he comes to us from the Army, TBC security practice leader. So he heads up our security practice, and he's got well over a decade of systems, network, and security engineering experience. And I would say I will match up his security team's capabilities and systems to most anybody in the industry. So I'm looking forward to having all of you meet them as we get through this program. Just to run through the agenda, we're going to talk about the imperative, why the digital transformation and how this hybrid cloud journey all makes sense. We'll have an expert panel discussion. We'll talk about some things that I think are highly relevant, things that our clients have found to be most important. And then we'll move on to a case study. We'll talk about a specific example. And then really the best part of this is the Q&A. Hopefully we'll have some good questions. I'll encourage all of you to go to the Q&A and ask your questions. I'm sure we'll get through most, if not all, of the questions today. And then in the end, when you exit out of this, you'll be given an opportunity to sign up for a consultation where you'll be able to talk to one of our experts. And I would strongly encourage you to do that. Go ahead and drain their knowledge and get some insight. So when you exit out, don't forget to look at that splash screen and go ahead and register for that. So what brings us here? So digital transformation, right? It's a great thing to talk about. We work with Gartner, and we have lots of resources, give us a whole ton of statistics. I think we can get mired in those. The reality is it's clearly obvious. Everybody understands that digital transformation is part of our future. 87% of the companies think that the digital transformation will disrupt their industry. I suspect 13% just aren't aware of it. But in the same study, less than half said that they were prepared for that disruption. So I'm excited to have all of you here. Obviously, you've taken those steps towards getting ready for it. So I'll talk about three key themes. So that will frame our discussion. So first, obviously, the fact that it's an imperative, it's a backdrop, and it quite honestly is a necessary disruption to IT. Second, the digital side of our business is obviously on the forefront. Cloud first and the hybrid cloud is the best way to embark on that journey. And then last, the reality is making use of the digital transformation to address security concerns, address a way to overcome resource gaps. Those are just ways to basically make use of that challenge and kill two birds with one stone. So I won't belabor all the statistics about what's so important and how digital transformation benefits everybody. The reality is we know that it increases operational efficiencies in the clients that we've worked with. It improves time to market, improves the customer experience. All those things are near and dear to us. And the only way we're going to reach that is through digital transformation. I think the most exciting stat I've read, though, is that the companies that embark on this and have a successful digital transformation show on average a 23% growth in their revenue and an increase in their margins. So we have to put a little bit of levity in this. 2020 has been a rough year. I think COVID-19 has certainly given us a chance to pause. In some cases, hasn't given us a chance to pause and has accelerated our move to a distributed workforce, has probably highlighted a few gaps, has probably accelerated the need for digital transformation. So, the reality is COVID-19 probably just made us all think about it on a much more expedited fashion. So what does the path look like to modernization, right? So the reality is, and again, this is all statistics. I think that will bear out. I suspect the participants will probably all nod on this. The reality is when there was a survey done, right, and we see sort of the outcomes here, but the question was, what's driving the need for their hybrid cloud? 86% of those that responded to a recent survey said that the hybrid cloud is their ideal IT operating model. So on a theoretical basis, that's great. But the reality is that less than half were getting the results that they're looking for. So the reality is, with all of that, even those that responded, a quarter of them had not even embarked on deploying a cloud. So those are some pretty crazy statistics. That just means that we all see the need, and then we're stuck in the quagmire of like, okay, so how do we get going when we have all of the other imperatives in our organization, including what we always like to call keep the lights on. So why? At the end of the day, most organizations are just not resourced for it, and we understand that. That's why we're here to talk to you about it. We're going to talk to you about some strategies. One of our partners, they did a study and said that they had 85% wanted to do it, and only a little less than 15% had adopted the hybrid cloud. So that's a real opportunity for us. So for TBC, we'd like to talk about the fact that we help our clients transform IT into a competitive advantage. Those are not idle words. The reality is we help clients to make best use of their investments to overcome the gaps, be it in resources and security and whatever other challenges they face. So we'll look forward to talking to you about how we can accelerate your move to a hybrid cloud. And with that, I'd love to turn it over to Jim, who will give you a little bit of a deeper appreciation for the journey in the hybrid cloud. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dieter. Appreciate the handoff. So, and once again, welcome everybody for attending TV Consulting's Top 5 Strategies to accelerate your move to hybrid cloud. You heard Dieter mention 3 themes that will carry forward through the rest of this webinar. They include the DX imperative, cloud first positioning, as well as security concerns and resource gaps. So let's double click on those a little bit more and talk to it in the form of trends. So first and foremost, unpacking this DX imperative a bit more, right? Organizations want it, they need it, they know they need it. But the reality is many of them have not yet really started down this path. For cost aside, much of it has to do with they just don't understand these steps for moving into a cloud space. And so continuing with those challenges, on top of that is the fact that there's no single recipe or playbook for success in moving to the cloud. And so they are quagmired in their standard operational motives, if you will, just keeping the lights out, keeping the lights on, and the servers up and running in order to just keep the business flowing. And as Dieter mentioned earlier, right, they know that this digital transformation is an imperative, but many are just not sure how to get there. So that's definitely one of the trends that we've noticed. In addition to this is the pandemic itself. As you're all aware, right? It's accelerating the need for digital transformation and cloud migration. This has become something of a wake-up call for us, if you want. The proverbial fuse has been lit, so to speak, right? Businesses know they need to react. They need to accelerate moving toward a cloud platform or risk being left behind. And potentially obsolete. An alarming statistic is from coming from Gartner is that as many as 74% of all businesses plan to permanently move employees out of their old offices after the pandemic. So 3 out of 4 businesses totally changing the way that they're looking to do business after this pandemic. That's an alarming statistic. Should it prove true in the coming year? So pretty significant stuff and a huge impact with regard to the pandemic. In addition to this, another trend that we're seeing is really around the transformation race itself. So the folks that are getting in there, the organizations that have chosen to move into the cloud computing space, the ones that will be the winners that we see in the end will be the ones that optimize that mix, coming up with the right balance of architectures that blend on-premise, private cloud, public cloud, and everything in between. The IT laggards will be the ones that still continue to rely heavily on their traditional on-prem infrastructure, either through cost rationale or once again, because they just frankly don't know how to get started and get out of the starting blocks. In addition to this, will be the go ahead and move this slide forward if you could. There we go. Perfect. Another trend that we're seeing is around skills and resource gaps that's continuing to widen. So one thing about cloud providers, they're really good at absorbing routine IT tasks, leaving some of the more complex stuff to the organizations to figure out. And their in-house staff doesn't necessarily have the skills to do that. There was a period of time when this notion that lift and shifting applications to the cloud could somehow organically grow those native cloud skills necessary, but that's not proving to be the case. And so they're finding they have an increasing gap around these skills and resources. There was a statistic that said that it's easier to find Bigfoot than it is to find a qualified cloud engineer in the real world. So hopefully that's not the case, but I'm sure some days it feels like that for a lot of IT organizations. So what's an IT leader to do, right? How do they scale their cloud skills quickly and effectively in order to stay in the race, right? And not get left behind. Gartner tells us that good cloud MSPs will help in that by augmenting organizations' expertise. So they'll bring in the certified and experienced cloud personnel in order to bring the necessary advice and the best practices to bear for them to help get them there quickly. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and bring up our panelists, if we could, please. And once again, Eric Marshall, Solutions Architect for TB Consulting, Tyler Edgett, Security Practice Leader for TBC. Welcome, guys. Appreciate you having on the panel today.
Thank you, Jim.
Hey, Jim.
Hey, let's go ahead and, Eric, let's start with you and let's start get grounded on some standard definitions. You know, we've got cloud, we got hybrid cloud, we got public cloud, private cloud, mixed cloud, you name it, every flavor under the sun. Tell us, unpack that a bit for us, and why does hybrid cloud rise to the top?
Sure. Well, hybrid cloud is a construct, if you will, that basically articulates how organizations take their private cloud offerings, their local data centers, their on-premise environment, extend it out to the public cloud and or third-party cloud providers, and essentially add in some centralized management, some automation, some orchestration to essentially operate the business and through the IT construct centrally. And that's really at its crux what hybrid cloud is. Now, there's varying degrees of maturity, of course, but at the end of the day, it's really on-prem local private cloud coupled with public or third-party cloud services with some centralized visibility, management, orchestration, and automation to really just help achieve business outcomes.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Can you give us some indication of some of the key factors that you've seen driving some of our clients to the cloud?
Certainly. You know, a lot of it comes out to sort of the three key drivers, really kind of forcing businesses to adapt to new changes. And one is skill shortages. And so as they find out that they need more services, more data, more capabilities, but they have very limited scope and where they can actually source talent from. Their engineers, you know, don't happen to live everywhere, and it's hard to really be able to scale a business, you know, either regionally or globally. many cases, with trying to bring on staff in each kind of pocket. So you have to be able to scale on demand, really, really rapidly. The best way to do that is to leverage services that can be controlled on demand and scaled on demand. And so that's one big driver. Another one is really just the advent and need to ingest new services, in addition to what they've already had from a legacy side. So as they start down this digital transformation journey, a big part of that is being able to bring on services that are really a combination of both really niche services where they kind of tackle a specific need, and other services that are definitely broader and have an ecosystem you can tie in a lot of other investments that you happen to make into it, such as backup as a service and management. So those are two really key drivers from a business side that happen to be driven a lot by IT organizations.
So how is the pandemic impacting all of that?
Sure. Well, it accelerated, quite frankly, in many respects. A lot of organizations now are faced with the immediate challenge of supporting a remote workforce. They also have, remote access to their clients, where simply, from a shipping, perspective, as it relates to actually, producing meetings, actually getting business done, if you will, has become a changed bird, so to speak. It's one of those deals where you had to understand how to be able to drive business, continue business operations, and then do it securely, do it safely, but then increase sales, increase distribution. I mean, all the aspects of business has really changed because of the pandemic in many respects. And so you have to find alternative ways to get going. And so, a lot of companies would prioritize remote access as an example. And, but they kind of pushed it off and wasn't a huge priority. All of a sudden became almost the number one priority overnight because of the pandemic and being able to support your workers. So that's really kind of a salient way that it's impacted. Obviously, it's changed the economy globally, but in IT, it really put focus and ownership on being able to produce secure remote access for workforces and allow yourself to distribute and produce services, globally, using technology instead of, some more legacy approach to things like, again, shipping, et cetera. So one of many examples.
Got it. So the desire is there, the need is there. The pandemic is certainly lighting a fire underneath that. But so why not just do it? What are the challenges that you're seeing that companies are typically face in moving to the cloud and getting started?
Well, I think that's probably the biggest issue is understanding where to start and really targeting out what's going to get you the best bang for the buck, so to speak, and certainly allow you to ramp up quickly and start ingesting these services rapidly. One of the first keys that's hit the majority of companies is how to get their workers to be able to access corporate data and corporate resources securely from wherever they happen to be in the country or the cities that they're in or across the globe. So coming up with really good access solutions, collaboration solutions, and then being able to support and manage your data itself and be able to protect it and make sure it's available, at all times, et cetera. All these things were sort of the key drivers on where to start depending on the need of the company. And certain companies, had a pretty mature stance on that front, so it wasn't as big a lift. Other companies, this is the first time they've ever faced it, and everyone was used to working out of an office. That's no longer a possibility. So what do we do? Oh my gosh! So that seemed to be the biggest, most prevalent examples of where to start.
Got it. And so those companies that are still trying to pull up their bootstraps, right, and figure out how to get started, now all of a sudden they're worried about things like evaluating workloads, applications, which ones to move. In addition, what factors are impacting? What do these organizations need to be thinking about with regard to that?
Well, it's still how to access and move with the times and access and move your data securely. There's a lot of ways to be able to produce access to things simply, but it's not necessarily the best approach. And if you don't really ingrain these solutions with security in mind, sort of security built into its DNA, it really opens hole and actually introduces exponential risk increases for any organization trying to tackle this. And so again, it's if you're leveraging 100% your existing IT resources who may or may not have a lot of experience and understanding how to implement services like this, companies would oftentimes want to reach out to, companies who do have experience doing this, like managed service providers, for instance.
Got it. Got it. And then with respect to latency, right? Application latency, what do you see as the impacts of that, of simply lifting and shifting, moving applications to the cloud? Think about workloads and everything else that comes into play, right? Where does latency fit into all of this?
That's a fun topic, and I say that in jest. So if there's any engineers out there, watching this, it's a nightmare that they've been living this entire time. So latency, especially when you're dealing with thick clients or legacy clients that are really meant to work in a data center, adjacent environment like an office. All of a sudden now you're trying to access the same thing over a slow internet connection that may have a lot of challenges between where this person is trying to access from and where they're trying to go. So all of a sudden, what used to be sort of a painful process, but was at least connecting and working, is no longer even working at this point. So fire time, and everyone has to put out fires. And so you got to come up with creative ways to solve that. A number of those ways could be application virtualization, if that's something that you can bring to bear. So now you can distribute apps simply to any device across the internet. Another one would be desktop virtualization, and being able to now have your work desktop in the same, again, data center adjacent location that you're used to, but accessing it through a device no matter where you're at. The limit, it deals with a lot of, and actually mitigates a lot of the issues that latency brings to that, depending on where you're at. And a lot of it's based on location.
Yeah. To your point, right? Especially with so many more remote workforces in place right now. In fact, I fully expect everybody on this webinar is working remotely right now as they're tuned into this. So latency and accessibility both go hand in hand for sure. Yeah, thanks. One other question, right? So one of the early promises of moving to cloud was around cost savings, or at least the perceived cost savings, right?
Sure.
Is that real? I mean, is it a thing, or is that a myth, like Bigfoot?
Well, I mean, I'd say that there's no such thing as a silver bullet when it comes to cloud. I think there's been enough out there, enough experience either way to understand that, for the most part, if you have a good strategy and a good plan going in and how you're going to realize your cloud savings and your cloud ecosystem, there could be a lot of cost savings involved. And if it makes you more efficient, if it limits, the need for any kind of CapEx spend, and you can offload it based on consumability. So the whole cloud, and really the beauty of the cloud, is to be able to consume on demand, right? And so the problem with that is also, if it's left uncontrolled and no guardrails, that demand just becomes, a big wildfire. It spreads. Yeah. All of a sudden, you got tons of resources, and your bill goes, through the roof, because you're running all this stuff that you may not need to, and there's no checks and balances, and you have this, again, big sprawl problem. But now it's extended out to tons of services you probably never had access to before. So that's one of the big gotchas with the cloud. But if done right, it's a very powerful tool. But honestly, it's going to be a long time before established organizations move to the cloud purely. I would say for startups, it's a good tool. It's a good method to really kind of reduce costs, at least initially. But again, at scale, all of a sudden, does it always make sense? Or do you have to think about a hybrid strategy? Because there are savings that you can also bring to bear as it relates to on-prem, and then tying that into public cloud services or SaaS services, et cetera. So there's definitely a good approach, but it all requires strategy and planning.
Got it. Once again, I guess that demonstrates just the value of bringing in a good cloud MSP to help work through a lot of those challenges. Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Appreciate that. Let's move over to security. Hey, Tyler. So, security remains one of the biggest factors that are impacting enterprises' future cloud strategies. Can you unpack that a little bit more for us, please?
Yeah. So, there's a lot of, just like Eric mentioned, right? There's no silver bullet. There's a lot of benefits to moving to the cloud, right? And especially if your workloads are tailored to that. But there's a lot of, you're exposing yourself to a lot of risk too, especially if you don't have people that really understand, the back end of these technologies and the lines of demarcation and where responsibility lies. Another huge one that we see is treating the cloud as a separate entity, right? Where oh, it's okay, I've moved this into the cloud. No, I don't have to worry about that anymore. I've had this conversation with developers, numerous times, and it's like, well, no, you still have to, your policies and procedures, your corporate standards still need to be applied, whether it's in the cloud or if it's on-prem. So you really need to make sure that you have a security solution and a security strategy when moving to the cloud, that allows you to protect those cloud resources and the data. You're ultimately still putting data up in the cloud, right? That protects that data the same way that it would on-prem.
Okay, thanks. So let's focus on hybrid cloud for a minute, right? A recent study of IT professionals deemed that hybrid cloud was the most secure of all IT operating models. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think that some of the reasoning behind why it was deemed that is, it gives you some options, right? Let's say you want to be compliant with something, maybe it's FedRAMP or HIPAA or something like that. You want to have a compliant environment. Well, cloud can offer you a really, a pretty, I'll say it's not easy, but it's easier than building all those controls and all those, partitioning off your whole internal or on-prem environment. You can simply take the data that needs to be compliant with that and have almost a compartmentalized environment up in the cloud that runs for that given security framework. So there's advantages and things like that. But, again, there has to be some thought and some strategy, because if you have that environment and then you go ahead and you make a VPN, make a site-to-site VPN tunnel between that and your on-prem infrastructure, well, guess what you just did, right? Like, well, now you've just extended the boundaries of that environment. And now whatever that VPN terminates on also has to be compliant with all of those standards and guidelines called out in whichever framework, HIPAA, or whatever you were going for. So you have to be super careful. But again, there are a lot of advantages to be gained. And this is why, I think, like we've been talking about this whole time, right? There's a lot of business. You can go after new business. You can go after new contracts. You can really grow your organization and grow your revenue streams by leveraging hybrid cloud. You have to be really, really careful when you're doing that.
Got it. So staying with the security aspects, right? So cloud misconfigurations they remain the number one cause of data breaches in the cloud. How should clients be thinking about security as they evaluate the workloads and they move to the cloud?
Yeah, so it's really important. Like I said, it's sort of in that first one. The main thing is making sure that you have a cohesive security, I'll say framework or solution, right? So a security framework that allows you to protect your cloud infrastructure the same way you do on-prem, right? Security is basically the core of security is about visibility, right? And you can't protect what you can't see, right? You can't detect you can't protect what you can't detect. So you have to be able to, like, let's say you have some applications that are running in the cloud, some applications running on premises. If somebody is coming after you, if there's an attacker that's going after your business, they're going to attack both those environments, right? You want to be able to see what are they doing and correlate those activities. What are they doing on my cloud environment? And then also be able to see what are they doing on my on-prem environment, right? If you can detect and stop them in the cloud environment, then you can put protections in place in your on-prem environment before they've even gotten to that environment, right? So, there's so really that cohesive security strategy is really, really important. Additionally, understanding which workloads are suited to the cloud, right? If you're going to take a legacy, I'll say a legacy application, right? Something that requires a whole virtual machine and an operating system and the application stack on top of that, and move that into the cloud, you have to understand that that's still your responsibility to do, the patching and the maintenance and all those things, because you still have a virtual machine, you still have an operating system. If you're going to, let's say, take it a step beyond that, and we're going to containerize our workloads, right? Let's say we want to use Docker or Kubernetes, right? I want to use Amazon Web Services, and I want they're going to run a Kubernetes cluster for me, and I can just put my containers up there. Well, that's great, but you still have to understand. So now you don't have the operating system part to worry about, the patching and things like that, but there is still technically an operating system within that Docker container. So you have to make sure that your containers there's vulnerability management for containers, right? So you have to make sure that your code is secure, that that the containers themselves are secure. And then if you go a step beyond that, and now we want to go to maybe functions as a service or serverless code, then you've abstracted away a whole nother layer, and you don't have to worry about Docker containers anymore, but you still have to make sure that your code is secure, right? You're not storing credentials in clear text in your code, or you have to make sure that your code is operating securely. So it's just there's a lot of, it's complicated. There's a lot of paradigms in there, but, you know, making sure that you have people and consultants that understand the minutia and how all that stuff fits together, so you can make sure that you're secure and you don't end up, like you said, misconfiguring something and, you know, shooting yourself in the foot. You're hoping to, you know, gain all these advantages by moving to the cloud, and you ended up just getting breached by moving up there.
So I guess, so a lot of information and detail to unpack there, right? And I know there will probably be some great questions for you guys as we go through the Q&A session. To summarize, I guess, you know, so cloud is definitely increasingly becoming a critical technology tool during the pandemic. And security is not something you want to build in on the peripheral, right? It has to be an integral part of the overall architecture from the foundation on up. So a recent statistic, right? So 90% of all cloud engineers have concerns about new security vulnerabilities that are rising from these sudden cloud adoption during the pandemic. So just food for thought there. There's a lot of concern in-house. Given that, Eric, why don't you walk us through the 5 strategies that we've come up with for accelerating the move to hybrid cloud?
Yeah, certainly. So really where you start is understanding strategically what you want to be able to achieve. And so hybrid cloud is really a result of you know, implementing a plan that really elevates your digital transformation strategy. So you move from your legacy IT environment and your IT processes, and then of course your siloed business processes. That's usually how that starts. So really understanding what you want to be able to achieve by making that shift and leveraging more modern services that can be brought on demand. And so some of that would be, you know, increasing the customer experience capabilities that you have today, and maybe that'll drive some competitive advantage. That's one of the big goals. Another one is enable and empower your remote workforce. Again, companies, you know, now more than ever in history, we're competing globally. So you have to be able to produce access and bring in resources from not just local places anymore. A lot of times you need that that capability to bring on talent from almost anywhere. Obviously with COVID and the pandemic, it's one of those deals where it sort of forced everyone's hand to that world. And I'd say the last one would be ultimately maybe some productivity increases, et cetera, that can drive it, cost savings as it relates to expanding and constantly evolving your infrastructure. These are all kind of needs that drive organizations over to you know, a good hybrid cloud plan. So from there, you assess and kind of document all your workloads. You look at your business processes and find out where you can optimize, where you can integrate. And then you have to address things like, what are some of the requirements around these workloads? Do they make sense to keep them on premise? Can we expand any of the stuff to the cloud? Is there any cost savings? Is there any kind of performance increases or, you know, cons that we have to be aware of? Measure that stuff out. You know, another one is really kind of analyze gaps. And because not every plan is going to be 100% perfect, and everything changes almost in real time, especially when you're dealing with introducing technology to produce results for business objectives and outcomes. So you have to constantly analyze and kind of adjust and tweak to make sure that you're going to get the best bang for your buck. And really, the best bang for the buck and the investment that you're making isn't just IT at all. That's one component of it, but really this is an organizational investment to change. And to adapt the way you function to be able to unlock these features. Technology is really just a driver to help make things easier. It's really the whole point of technology is to really go down that path. And then 4 is really just mapping out, you know, making sure that the business outcomes that you want to achieve are clear and realistic and achievable. So again, you don't want to invest heavily into something and change your entire organization without really understanding exactly how you're going to measure success as it relates to this. And so you want to make sure you're on track and find a way to track that progress. And then lastly, find out where your strengths are, what you can do realistically in-house within the timeframes that you set up to achieve your plan, and then where you need to bring in some expert help. And that's where, you know, companies like managed service providers come in. Again, they are able to tackle many different things, or managed security service providers, right? These are people who this is what they do all day long. They're experts in these fields that can really help accelerate your move to not only a hybrid cloud, but ultimately your digital transformation journey, if done and leveraged correctly. But again, it all starts with that plan. really seeing high level what you want to be able to achieve and what timeline and what kind of level of investment you're willing to put into it to achieve it.
Nice, thanks for that. And there will be, we'll have more information to share, but in the meantime, let's shift gears just a little bit. Eric, I'd love to have you walk us through a case study with one of our clients to help kind of bring this all together based on what we've heard so far in the webinar.
Yeah, sure. So you mentioned Lippert here, and Lippert, you know, it's a pleasure to work with a partner like them because they really get it. They understand what they want to be able to do. They know what their problems are. They know what they need to do internally to help solve them. They also know when to bring in the right, you know, the right team outside who can really kind of, again, accelerate their goals and really get them pointed. And so a couple of areas that, you know, that Lippert is super relevant to a company like Lippert. You know, again, they're a multi-billion-dollar manufacturing company. And so for them, a big part of their growth model is acquisitions. And with acquisitions comes a whole litany of issues. As anyone who's ever dealt with that, or if you expand out operations, if you're in that type of business, the more you grow, the more you ingest, the more potential issues you kind of inherit, you know, and the more risk you're down adding to your organization overall. And so you have to find a way to produce some standards and be able to ensure that not only is your core business, you know, secure and safe and operating effectively, but now your new entity, you want to be able to unlock what you just invested in and make sure you can do that securely and safely. It's not always just about IP. You still have to operate in many cases, and you want to make sure you're doing that cleanly. So what they came up with is a couple of different solutions we brought to bear. But some of the more relevant ones is how do you do patch management for all these new companies plus your own company, and then as you continue to expand, you just keep adding your footprint, but you don't really necessarily have the ability to increase headcount to support that. And maybe, you know, there's other technologies you want to bring to bear. So, you know, like a lot of companies, they had made some very significant investments in tools like Microsoft System Center Configuration Manager, and which does a lot of patch management and application deployments and things along those lines for internal Microsoft shops. So, you know, potentially endpoints and servers can be patched and maintained using these servers. And then you can, you know, deploy apps and things along those lines pretty centrally, but not all these acquired companies will have something like that in place. And so you have a choice, you know, do you want to integrate their domain? Do you want to, you know, integrate all these services and try to produce it that way? Or do you want to leverage a cloud solution to be able to scale out and make things like applications, you know, distributable anywhere to any device, but while ensuring that you're maintaining security standards for the company? Can you expand out and be able to bring in support, you know, BYOD, bring your own device deployments and environments? And so they were quickly understanding that the best way for us to scale is to bring in a partner who can really provide some management and guidance on that from a larger team who can be kind of focused on this. And so as we expand our operations, we expand our business, we can maintain our security standards and our patching standards and application deployment standards at scale infinitely. And so they brought in an MSP to tackle that. And that's, you know, one of the main areas that we've been able to expand recently. They also leverage us for backup as a service, and that's something that's also critical. Number one goal of IT is protect and make sure that data is available. That's our biggest job across the landscape. And so realizing how important that data is critical. Understanding what the impact would be if it's gone is another good thing, and it really helps drive a plan of what the need is from a plan side to ensure that we're protecting the data cleanly across every entity that they're dealing with, whether it's their corporate environment or any of the acquired companies. So we have a very standardized approach to be able to onboard that. We leverage the cloud as one of the copy mechanisms, but also the orchestration and management mechanism. And so we enact that in a hybrid fashion. To ensure that we have orchestration between local copies and then cloud copies, and then the restores and reporting and everything else are tied into that. These are all services that we're able to leverage both on-prem instances of. So in the case of endpoint management, it would be SCCM and some other tools locally, then leveraging Microsoft Intune and some other cloud-centric tools centrally to be able to produce, again, a really cohesive multi-tiered patch management and an application distribution plan. And backup, it's again, local copies, local capabilities brought into the cloud with cloud orchestration and centralized management across the board. allows them to scale and onboard new entities and new sites almost on demand. And again, it's something that we can do for them so that their core team can continue focusing on other business outcomes that are certainly more relevant to the business, and leaving the more minutia-based kind of maintenance activities, if you will, to endpoint management and BAS. Not the sexiest thing in the world to do if you're in IT, but certainly compelling if, you know, if anything breaks, it's going to keep them up at night. So once you bring those services over to some experts who this is what they do all day, let them worry about it so they can go on to accelerating what their business really needs.
That's awesome. Thanks, Eric. I appreciate you sharing that with us. Let's go ahead and open up the chat line and see if we can't get a couple of questions out there for our panelists. So if anybody has anything, feel free to put them in the chat window and we will go ahead and do our best to provide a meaningful response. Okay, we got one coming in here. So what's the advantage of using an MSP for the move to hybrid cloud? Eric, you want to take that one?
Yeah, certainly. And again, the MSP, this is what they do all day long, right? They've got lots of experience with tons of different organizations. So they know a lot of the gotchas. They have a standardized methodology and approach with standardized tool sets. And again, an expert team who can provide monitoring and maintenance every step of the way through the process. And so bringing on MSP just is really, one, to accelerate your plans and outcomes so we can get you to transform quickly, but two, to ensure that you have eyes on all of these areas really cleanly through every step of the process. Where again, a lot of organizations, you're really good at a lot of things, but no one's experts at everything, right? So this is something that plays to our strengths, and so we're able to bring an entire dedicated team of people to bear who, again, can laser focus and ensure positive results.
Got it. Thank you for that. Another one coming in. Are you seeing any novel approaches with your clients in dealing with country level data residency requirements?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So one of the coolest ones that I've seen is an organization that operated, it had basically had customer information from Europe and had to comply with the new GDPR requirements. And so what they were able to do was basically use a data classification tool to actually sort of like tag the data for like which country it was, like which country it applied to, or basically just doesn't need to reside in Europe, or can it come to the US because they were a multinational organization. And then they have database. I guess one of the nice things about going to the cloud is that you can get basically instances of your application across most countries in the world. And so they would have database applications in those different locations, and then they would do basically data routing based on the tag data, right? The metadata about that information, so that it was able to route to the right databases, and they could keep, the GDPR data that needed to be held in those countries to those countries. So that, I thought that was a pretty nice. So basically that requires that's not something you can put in really after the fact, right? You can't like roll out some solution that deals with customer information, then go back after the fact and like crawl through all this data and where did this come from? You have to do that. Like you have to think about that sort of thing up at the front to make sure that you like that solution they put in for the data classification had to be done up front so that they could basically do that and be successful.
Very good. Thanks, Tyler. All right, another one coming in. What is the most logical first workload or app to move to hybrid cloud?
Oh, I'll take that one. That's a pretty broad question, obviously, but what I see on the field a lot when I speak with customers is things like email and things like collaboration tools. Security tools is another one, right? So it depends on what the use case is, but moving to, and I'll give you a good example, is taking your existing on-premise Exchange environment for email, and then you have local Active Directory, and you have all that ecosystem that kind of supports your local environment. And then you want to be able to now make it cloud accessible. You want to be able to manage endpoints, et cetera. You want to be able to elevate beyond just email and maybe some intranet function into a kind of cohesive collaboration suite that also produces, endpoint management, et cetera, and a bunch of other security capabilities and meeting and, again, collaboration capabilities. So Office 365 is a natural progression. And so to do that, there's really a hybrid cloud step to this. And so you have to now directly tie in your on-prem environment and your cloud environment together You leverage the cloud essentially to provide some centralized management, but you still have the benefit of being able to produce like local policies, for instance, and be able to support your environment natively. So if you're in a transitive state where you're not ready to move everything to the cloud 100%, but you want to make sure you have some really good bulletproof solutions that you can tie together right away. That's one of the most common use cases that I've seen out in the field today.
Got it. Okay, next question. What's the importance of going with a cloud agnostic partner?
Sure. So a cloud agnostic partner is, again, with the premise that there is no silver bullet. Another good euphemism is to say that you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. And so being cloud agnostic is just as important as producing, resiliency in your on-prem environment. So you have more than one of something to ensure that you don't have single points of failure. You want to leverage cloud services in the same fashion wherever possible. So being able to produce something, Microsoft may not be the best fit for everything. So you need to have some capabilities and exposure to produce other services. That could be public cloud services, or there could be some services and solutions that a third-party cloud provider can provide that almost nobody can, that really fits your need. Or they have the ability to tailor something to a business in ways that public cloud or other cloud services can't do. These are all good benefits to show why cloud agnostic partners are important.
Perfect, thanks. And one more coming in. They're asking for best practices or suggestions for how to manage your security stack between on-prem and in the cloud, given that many legacy security tools are data center centric and application based. Is the best approach to migrate to a cloud-based security tools?
Yeah, that's I'll take that one. That's a good question. That's something that's actually one of the most common questions that we get is like, what I think you're referring to in terms of like data center centric is like things like network monitoring, right? If you have your data center and you want to do network monitoring there, well, one of the best ways to do that is to take a sensor basically and look at span or tap traffic off of like your core switch and look at east-west traffic and north-south traffic from just inside your firewall. But the problem is that requires a technology called span that is specific to like hardware switches. Like, I mean, all of them have it, Cisco, Dell, everybody has all those switches have it, but that's not something you can get in the cloud because of the way that it's software defined networking up in the cloud. So that's not something you can do up in the cloud. So you have to look at, you still want the data, but you just have to go different ways about for getting that, right? So again, that depends heavily on what type of environment it has. Like, let's say there are VMs. Well, if there's VMs, then we can do agent deployments onto all the VMs, and we can capture that network traffic from the VM itself so basically it's a decentralized capture mechanism. So instead of just saying, I don't need to touch all of the VMs, I can catch all that network traffic when it's routed through my core switch. You have to say, okay, that's not going to work anymore. Now I need to go out and do decentralized and go and put agents on all these machines. They can capture the network traffic as it's written to the wire on those virtual machines. If you have something like, let's go again, I'm going to go sort of 3 levels here. Like, so the Kubernetes example, or you have a Dockerized or a containerized workload, then you can do things like sidecar, right? So there's the ability to like within the Kubernetes networking cluster, within that network stack, there's the ability there to like monitor network traffic via basically like sidecar and containers next to each other. And then if you're going like full serverless, like, I'm just going to give my Python code or my JavaScript or my Java code to the functionless server code, and it's going to run it for me based on API ingestion. Well, then you have to rely on that cloud provider's logging mechanisms, right? And that's also something that can be applied to those other examples. Like I've seen, like AWS has some like it's called Flow. It's something to do with Flow, basically, where they can capture, like, give you a copy of all of the network traffic that they've seen coming in and out of your VPS. But yeah, so if you're going serverless, then you're basically entirely reliant on the logging that is provided from that cloud provider. So then again, you have to make sure that the cloud provider you're going with has a solution around that, and that solution meets your compliance needs, meets the needs of your organization, so that you can, basically have that cohesive security coverage. And then in terms of, do you want to migrate to cloud-based security tools? It's not required, but the real reason why I think it's important to have at least some cloud, some cloud capabilities built into your security tools is for doing things like remote workforce, right? So like, it's less about being able to monitor cloud applications, because you could ultimately, like, there are secure mechanisms for sending that data back onto your environment. But you look at like remote workforces, are like, I want to know what all my users are working from home now, like, but they have their laptops at home. I still want to know what's going on. I still want logging. I still want the same level of visibility, but I don't want them to have to be on a VPN the whole time, because again, if their machine gets infected and my VPN is configured to allow all traffic to given networks, then that attacker can just pivot from their machine into my environment. So having cloud-based security tools where at least you can do like that remote logging, like the collection from those remote devices over secure, TLS web ports and things like that. That's where I think it becomes really important to have. It doesn't need to be cloud-based. Like, you don't have to move your whole security stack into the cloud, but you need to have the ability to do cloud, like basically like cloud-based collection on your security tools.
Got it. Thanks for that. So we have a couple minutes left. So we'll just take one last question before we wrap things up. The question is coming in is, how involved would your team get in mapping in hybrid cloud journey, evaluating workloads?
Yeah, that's a great question. Very involved. So again, we want to ensure our client's success at every step of the path, right? So regardless of what the service is that we're bringing to bear to help them with, we essentially deal with not only the strategic planning side. One of the results from almost all of our assessments is to produce essentially a roadmap on how to achieve whatever it is that outcome is that the client is looking for. And so, to be able to do that realistically, it's not just giving them a list of what's wrong and where the gaps are. It's giving them an action plan, so to speak, on what you need to do to fix it and how to get there, and then what services we can bring to bear to accelerate that. And then the same holds true for any of our services, essentially. But starting with that, then we also look at what other services we can then layer on top of that to ensure that we have a cohesive plan going forward that helps you grow, really methodically. So if you start off with, say, a security assessment or something along those lines, based on that result alone, you can not only talk about some really high-end, world-class security services, but now you can also talk in tie in potentially some infrastructure services, some management services along those lines, et cetera, as it makes sense to produce that outcome result.
Got it. Thanks, guys. I appreciate that. So recognize there are probably a lot of questions left to be asked and answered. Running low on time, so I want to be mindful of schedules. Just wanted to put it out there for those of you that are interested in learning more. Through our work with clients like Lippert, we've identified a hybrid cloud evaluation process to help guide you through your hybrid cloud journey. And we would like to invite each of you to an individual complimentary 30-minute consultation to help evaluate where you're at in your cloud journey. This is not a sales pitch. This is pairing you up with a solutions expert to provide insight and understanding your cloud migration opportunities. So we want to meet you where you're at, not be talking to you and telling you everything we want to know. We want to understand where you're at in your journey and how we can help, or at least give you some thoughtful advice to consider when you're thinking about your resource needs, security, workload balancing, achieving ROI, et cetera. So you're going to find a opportunity as we close this webinar out to sign up for a free 30-minute consultation. We hope you will take advantage of that. And we look forward to continuing the conversation through this free hybrid cloud consultation. Thank you all and have a great day.